Well, welcome back to This Old Airplane. I'm your host, John Gartner, and today we're going to start a series on restoring a Curtiss OX-5 engine. I've asked my friend and colleague, Larry Simpkins, to take over, and he's going to tell you what we've been doing on this engine as we prepare to put it back in the original 1918 Curtiss Jenny we're restoring. So stay tuned and watch this video, and look for future videos that will be coming out about this engine restoration.
Thanks, John. In this set of videos, we're going to show you the rebuilding of an original Curtiss OX-5 aircraft engine. This engine is actually the power plant of an original Curtiss Jenny, also of 1918 vintage, that Blue Swallow aircraft are restoring. A few facts about this wonderful engine. Over 12,000 of these engines were produced between 1912 and 1918. And the engine saw service with both the American and the British military, both during World War I and successive years. The Curtiss OX-5 is often referred to as the engine that the early aviators most swore at and swore by. A few facts about the actual engine itself. It is a water-cooled V8 of 502 cubic inches, 8 individual cylinders. Each one has a bore of 4 inches and a stroke of 5. The horsepower is 90 horsepower, not a great deal of horsepower, especially considering the weight, which is some 385 pounds. However, the engine was substantially built, and that, as you'll see in successive videos, did at least give the engine some degree of reliability. We're now going to show you the major internal parts of the OX-5 engine. Here is the camshaft. This is unique on the OX-5 engine, and those of you familiar with camshafts will notice that this is distinctly different to any camshaft you've seen before. In front are the various bearings the camshaft runs in, and at the end there is the bronze gear that goes on the end of the camshaft, connects the camshaft to the crankshaft. Let's now look at these cams in closer detail. We notice that there is actually 3 cams per cylinder instead of the usual 2 cams on a conventional camshaft. That's because the OX-5 has a rather unique valve gear. This center cam is used just like a conventional engine to push open the exhaust valve. These 2 external cams, where they ride on the intake followers, are actually used to pull the inlet valve open, which is why this camshaft looks rather strange. When we show you the valve gear in a later video, you'll see how all this mechanism works. The crankshaft of the OX-5 engine is also quite a substantial piece of metal. Looks very familiar to crankshafts that any of you have seen before in big V8 engines, except for the long extension on the front for the propeller shaft. Crankshaft has 5 main bearings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the journals are paired for the connecting rods. That's why they're so wide, so 2 connecting rods can go onto each journal. Important part of the crankshaft is this very large bearing on the front. This large bearing is actually the thrust bearing. This is what takes all of the thrust from the propeller. And it's designed so this engine could be put into an aircraft as a tractor, where the propeller is pulling the aircraft, or a pusher where the propeller is pushing the airplane. This small bevel gear you see here is the drive gear for the external oil pump on the OX-5 engine. The OX-5 has a very simple oil system, although it's important because oil is really the major cooling item in the OX-5. This gear drives the oil pump. The oil is passed up through the crankshaft, down through the crankshaft bearings, and down to the main bearings, and then via internal passages inside of the crankcase out to the connecting rod journals here. This is the major component of the OX-5 engine. This is the casting that forms the body of the engine. It's an amazing piece of work. It's a great casting, and for 1912 and 1918 it really was state of the art. The studs, as you see here, are where the individual barrels, individual cylinders are bolted onto the engine. I'm going to turn the engine over so we can have a good look at the inside, and you'll see how well built this engine is. Here, as you can see, 5 main bearings, a substantial crankshaft. All the internal components of this engine were very well built. They could probably have handled 3 or 4 times the horsepower this engine produced. And that, as I said earlier, did lead to the overall reliability of this engine. If there was any reliability issues, it was usually due to the accessories and not these substantially built components as you see here. Now we have the crankshaft and the camshaft reinstalled in the engine. Crankshaft, as we showed you earlier, 5 main bearings. And then on the number 5 bearing, and on the Curtis OX-5, this is actually the rear of the engine, and this is the front. They're kind of slightly backwards. On the very number 5 bearing here is this drive gear. This bevel drive gear is the drive gear that drives the external oil pump. If you look deep into the crankcase here, you can see where the camshaft is now installed, and as I turn the crankshaft, you'll see the camshaft turning. The camshaft is connected to the crankshaft via this gear mechanism on the rear of the engine, and it's critical for this gear to be in the correct mesh with the camshaft gear to ensure that the valve timing on the engine is correct.